So we're going to continue to look at things that have got components and containers and just some considerations as it relates to editing in responsive. So we're going to, we still have that page open. If you're following this in sequence, it was the My Page where we went through and took a look at the page properties. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a grid here. And we're going to go through and take a look at a couple of different things that we can do with that. So with the grid, when you load in a grid, you're going to get this error message. Everyone gets it. And it's just a prompt really to fix something. So it's this desktop column widths cannot be empty. So we're going to edit, click edit on the grid responsive, open that up. And what it's referring to here is that this desktop column widths has no column widths designated. So, and there has to be a relationship between the number of unique containers and the number of numbers designated for a column width. So here, the simplest way, and there's some instructions underneath here. Well, these essentially, the simplest way to think about this, if you've got 3 up here, you need to have 3 columns that, when you add their numbers together, are going to add to 12. So the simplest thing to do here would be 4, 4, and 4. And basically what that's saying is that there are 3 containers, and as it relates to 12, these will be equal spaces. And you'll be able to see that here in just a second. So the other thing, so this is just on the desktop view. We can also designate what we want this to look like on the tablet view. And again, just for simplicity, we're going to go ahead and just copy these in here. 444. Many times these are not used that way. So for instance, if we had, if we think through this on the desktop, on the left-hand side, we had some text, and here we had a picture, and here we had additional text. And we realized that on the mobile view, really what we want to do is we want to have that text stacked above. We want to have a space, and then we don't want to put that picture in there because it's not going to be conducive to viewing on mobile. And that second piece, that's the second text we want to have underneath. So we would just change this here. This is kind of the second way to look at these things. It's not only in columns, but in rows. So if we went 12, 0, 12. So what that is telling AEM is, again, all the rows work in factors of 12, unless of course it's 12 itself. So then what that's going to do is, in the desktop view, we want 3 columns equally spaced. The tablet we want the same, but when we get to mobile, create rows. So this is going to be its own row, 12. We're not going to have what's in the middle here. We're saying leave that out, and then make that last column its own row in mobile. So as it relates to, so that's kind of it. This takes a little bit of time to get your head wrapped around. The best thing to do here is just to play with it. So we definitely recommend, again, go into the training server and play with it a little bit. So as it relates to specifics for responsive, up here there's a couple of things. On the responsive template, by default, it's click to yes, responsive template. And then you also have the choice to make it non-responsive if that was something that served a business case of yours. And then under the grid type, we have different sizes. And then we also have a designation for nested grids, which are not highly recommended. There may be a challenge in using regular grids where you might want to nest some for a design reason. But let's go ahead and click OK on that. And here we can see that we've got 3 equal columns, and that's what it's going to look like in the desktop view. So we're going to show you a couple more things here as well. So we're just going to add in a couple of image components. And the shortcut is, of course, just to right-click and copy these, and then paste them in. So we're just going to do this to fill out this entire grid. So I have this grid set up. It's got 3 equal containers, and I've got image components inside of those. So I'm just going to grab some images and drop them in. So we're going to have this little tax icon, drop that in. So these have all scaled up to fill out the container that the component is within. You can already see there's a little bit of, this isn't as crisp as it should be, and you got some jagged edges here. So let's take a look at a couple of different things here. So we're going to just, within the component, right click, we'll click Edit. And as it relates to images, you know, what we want to be able to do, and first I'm going to center this up, but we also want to, you know, we want to make, if the, we want to designate whether or not this should scale. So here it's a little bit awkwardly worded, but really what we want to do is say don't scale the image. Because what will happen is this image will scale up to fill out the size of the container, and it is just a small icon. From a design perspective, we don't need it that big. And from an image quality perspective, we need to be aware that it's not going to withstand going up to that size. Now, if you wanted to have it to that size, you just have to make sure that your image quality is up to snuff, and that it's going to be able to actually get scale up and still keep its integrity. So that's one thing that we want to look at there. Again, and we've talked before about lazy load, and it's definitely recommended. So we're just going to click OK. We can see that looks much better. We can also tell that it is not scaling. So it's not scaling to fit the container. It's just its original size. So we're going to go through here and do this on each one of these just real quick. And here we've got, there we go. So again, that's in the image component. We want to go through and set that not to scale. So a couple of things we can look at in the container side of this is if we click Edit and pull this up, there's a tab in here that you want to be aware of, and that's this responsive tab down here. You can also do this in the grid, but there may be a situation where you want this to hide, that particular container to hide in one of these views. So we're going to go ahead and hide it in, say, tablet. And we'll just take a quick look at that and see what that does. So now we'll go into preview. And so again, we're going to click through we're going to kind of size this browser to go into the different views. So here we're in desktop, and here we're in tablet, and we can see that image drops out. If we go down to the mobile size, you'll see it's going to, first of all, it's stacked. That's right, so we had it designated, even though it was a little bit awkward, we had it designated to stack. But anyway, we can see that that was also designated to drop out in the tablet view via that tab. So it's just a good thing to know that that's there if for whatever reason the ability to do that with the grid responsive doesn't satisfy your need. You can get that need satisfied by clicking on the container and clicking on that responsive tab and enacting which view you want one of those containers to be hidden in. So now we're going to take a look at some other things. We'll mention this as we go along, but as it relates to responsive and just in general page load times within AEM, some things that as it relates to components that we recommend. So we're going to go through and just take a look at some of the things that are in this page. And so here we've got an interspace component. If we were to click on this and edit, we can see that some padding has been added in here. The other thing that people use the interspace component for is definitely to add padding or margin or to include a divider, which is like a horizontal rule. And if you were to go through and click on divider, include divider. Then you could decide what if you wanted it to be normal or small. So that seems like a pretty good component to have, because you could add in the spacing and include a horizontal rule. But the issue becomes, so you've got one there, you've got another one here, is that all these components add load time to your page. And there's actually another way to affect that padding. So again, almost all this padding is going to be represented in the same way, top right, bottom left. So we've got 10 pixels of padding on the top. So if I was to go through and, if we were to take a look at this and if we were to delete that, we could affect the same change by clicking on this container, going to attributes, and adding in that padding as well, and adding 100 in here. This does not add to the page load time. It's not a component. So definitely recommend, as it relates to components, being very wary of adding in too many interspace components when essentially you can affect the same change by using a container, which doesn't add any load time. So here we can also see we have a grid component and we have a nested grid. So this is something else that adds a considerable amount of load time. Now you can see what they're trying to do here is that they're using this. If you were to click through this grid responsive, you can see you've got 3 columns, and this third column over here also has a grid in it. So in different situations where this is being displayed, and if you were to look at this here, you can see in the tablet and in the mobile view, this third column is going to have its own row. But we've added some complexity to it in that when that shows up as a row, we have these other additional configurations that are going to make this display differently. So it's a pretty complex pattern, but it results in a pretty nice design. We just have to be careful not to have too many nested grids on a page. So there is a nested grid, and you've got a nested grid here as well. Actually, we've got a couple. And then down here a little further, more nested grids as well. So just a word of caution, and again, interspaces, is that as it relates to components, and especially on a mobile view, we don't want like a really slow page load time. To use alternatives to the padding option within an interspace by using the padding option in the container, and then avoid nested grids when at all possible. So that's kind of a broad overview of containers and components. There is specific help for responsive components listed on the CMS Online Help Guide, and we will do a deeper dive into grid responsive, but that's just kind of a general overview of some of the settings that you can deal with as it relates to getting a good responsive web page.